Hello and welcome to the Ready for Change coaching audio blog. My name is Christopher Testa. I'm picking up from where we left off from the last article, The Four Faces of Burnout. That's where we spent some time looking at burnout from a couple of different areas: physical, psychological, which we broke down into two types, that's compassion fatigue and adrenal fatigue. And the fourth, which is misalignment burnout. And that's the one I wanted to spend some time with today. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the behaviors or patterns that emerge when we're misaligned from who we truly are. This is also known as maladaptive behaviors that we adopt when we find ourselves walking paths that were never truly ours to begin with. So, remember what we explored about misalignment burnout? How life seems to hold a path uniquely shaped for each of us. Yet, for all kinds of reasons, we veer away from it. And often in the moment, those reasons seem valid. They might even feel like the right responsible choice at the time. But here we are, years down the road, still on that path, exhausted and worn down, maybe even a little scraped and bruised. Sometimes we've been on it so long that we forget what was really ours. We become so far removed from who we really are that it's hard to recognize what we've become, or worse, we've learned to justify the disconnect. And so that's what I want to talk about today: the maladaptive behaviors. First of all, what does that even mean, maladaptive behavior? Well, through life, we all have the tendency to pick up behaviors that maybe served at one time, usually out of protection or some other form, but they become maladaptive in a sense that they don't serve anymore. We adapt in a way that is not healthy for us. So, to keep it simple, the patterns that we develop in the state of misalignment, these patterns usually start as useful tools. They help us cope, protect, soothe, or meet our needs in the way we know how at the time. And they served then. But over time, they become disruptive, draining, and even damaging. They keep us stuck. They deepen our exhaustion. They contribute to the burnout that so desperately needs our attention and our realignment. So let's take a closer look at these patterns and how they show up. And just to be clear, this list isn't exhaustive, but here are four of the most common patterns that seem to turn up. Starting with overcommitting, saying yes when you really mean no. This often overlaps with people pleasing, prioritizing others at the cost of bypassing yourself. The overthinker, ruminating on the past, obsessing over the future, or getting trapped in analysis paralysis. Here, thinking hijacks the action. The overrider, pushing past your body's signals. Remember the story I shared about my own burnout as a chef? This was a classic example. Your body, your mind, even your soul sending messages, and yet you override them. And then the disconnected dreamer, adrift and unanchored. You've lost touch with meaning and purpose. You dream, imagine, even plan, but never act. Inaction becomes the pattern here. These are just a few of the patterns we'll be exploring more deeply in the next pieces. If you see yourself in any of these already, know this. There's nothing wrong. I'm doing air quotes and wrong, like you can see it. But there's nothing wrong with you. These patterns were learned for a reason. And that means they can be unlearned too. Recognizing these patterns or behaviors we've adopted, especially the ones that no longer serve us, is the first real step toward change. The patterns I'm sharing here aren't the only maladaptive behaviors that can show up in burnout, but they are some of the most common. My hope is that by exploring these, you'll start to recognize aspects of your own experience. Maybe even name a pattern you've unknowingly adapted to. So let's take a closer look at each one. Pattern 1, the overcommitter. The overcommitter says yes when every part of them is screaming no. Sound familiar? This pattern often forms from a deep desire to be helpful, responsible, or liked. but underneath it lies a fear of disappointing others or being perceived as selfish. I remember listening to Marshall Rosenberg talk about the difference between self fullness and selflessness. He said, we should never say yes to something unless we're doing it from a self fullness place, where meeting the request feels nourishing and aligned, rather than selflessness, where we agree to something that leaves us feeling depleted. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that being an overcommitter is not just about having a packed calendar. It's about habitually putting others' needs ahead of your own, often at the expense of your time, energy, and well being. You may tell yourself, it's just one more thing, or they really need me, even if your body grows more tired and your spirit more resentful. Overcommitting can look like being everyone's go to, handling things no one asked you to, or maybe just simply not giving yourself permission to rest. And over time, you don't just burn out, you fade out. Your own goals, needs, and desires get pushed so far down, they start to feel like luxuries rather than necessities. There comes a time when being the overcommitter has to stop, and choosing yourself gets to start. Pattern number 2, the overthinker. The overthinker lives in the mind, constantly analyzing, ruminating, second guessing. Whether it's dwelling on the past or spiraling about the future, this pattern hijacks action and replaces it with mental spinning. At first, it might feel productive, like you're being careful or responsible. But too much thinking becomes a trap. You might replay conversations, obsess over decisions, or endlessly plan without ever moving forward. This pattern often comes from a fear of making the wrong move. You know, fear of failure or fear of rejection. The brain tries to protect you with information, logic, and control, but instead it paralyzes you and it leads to an action that really wasn't what you wanted. The result? Exhaustion from thinking about doing rather than doing, or the cleanup of the doing that was destructive. And the most painful part is knowing exactly what you want to do, but feeling stuck in the what ifs or the not ets or the, yeah buts. Pattern 3, the overrider. The overrider is the one who keeps going no matter what. First, your body whispers, and then it shouts. Your emotions tug at you, your energy crashes, but you override every signal. You push through, disconnect from your needs, and pride yourself on your ability to carry on. I know this one. At some point, this pattern may have been a survival skill. Maybe you didn't have the luxury of stopping, resting, or feeling. But over time, pushing through becomes a way of life. And the cost is high. You might ignore signs of stress, suppress emotions, or numb out completely. You become so good at coping that you forget what thriving feels like. Eventually, the body forces a pause through illness, breakdown, or just sheer burnout. Because the truth is, we're not meant to override ourselves. We're meant to listen. And next, pattern 4, the disconnected dreamer. In this pattern, you've lost touch with your sense of meaning and purpose. You feel adrift, maybe, going through the motions each day, knowing deep down that what you're doing isn't aligned with who you really are. At first glance, this pattern may not seem like it includes a clear maladaptive behavior, but that's exactly the point. Inaction becomes the behavior. Despite feeling disconnected, you stay put. You avoid. You override the signals. Not unlike the overrider, but instead of pushing through, you shut down. The disconnected dreamer often talks, imagines, even makes plans, but rarely takes action. And usually the inaction is rooted in fear: fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of disappointing others, or self. Oh, and let's not forget the naysayers. I cannot hear Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice when you talked about this. Ignore the naysayers. Sorry, couldn't help it. But the naysayers are the voices that tell you what you can and cannot do, what you're good enough for or not. Sometimes they're external, and oftentimes they're internal. Maybe because at one point there was external voices, naysayers saying what you can and cannot do. But after a while, sometimes that's all that's left is the voice, the one that's in your head that says, I can't because, I wouldn't work because, I'm not good enough because, more of the yeah buts. That voice that reminds you how risky it is to try something new, how little time you have, how much things cost, or how many reasons there are to just not. Sound familiar? Okay, so now what? Maybe you've taken the burnout assessment. Maybe you recognize yourself in one or more patterns we've just explored. Now you're wondering, how do I actually start to shift this? I'm ready for change. Now what? Well, let's start with what may seem obvious. And I know it's not lost on me that you're reading this on a platform where, 3 easy steps to a better life and headlines are everywhere. But this work runs deeper. This isn't that. It's not about just doing what someone said on social media. It's real change. And that starts by naming it. So, step 1, identify the unhelpful pattern and its opposite. So, for example, you can, start with something simple. Whatever the pattern is, get clear on the alternate behavior. So, for example, the overcommitter needs to begin saying no, to set boundaries, to learn where they end and others begin, and to place themselves higher on their priority list. The overrider needs to start listening to their body, to slow down, to practice mindfulness, rest, and true self attunement. The overthinker needs to recognize when they're spinning in the past or spiraling into the future and gently come back to the present moment. And the disconnected dreamer needs to reconnect with meaning and purpose, to take imperfect action, to dare to fail forward instead of staying stuck in imagined places, to go from dreaming to doing, to waking up. So, yes, step 1 is naming what needs to change. But step 2, that's the work that goes much deeper. Step 2, explore the belief behind the behavior. Every pattern you've developed, every way you've coped, was likely rooted in a belief. A belief about who you are, what you're worth, what's possible for you, what others expect of you. We call these limiting beliefs. And while they may have served a purpose at one point, they're often the reason patterns exist in the first place. Working with a trained counselor or coach can help uncover and shift those beliefs. But I also know not everyone has access to that kind of support right away, anyways, whether it's due to time, finances, or just not feeling ready. So that leads me to step 3. This is something that you probably could do on your own. Realigning with your core values. One powerful thing you can do on your own is get crystal clear on your core values. And I mean your values, not the ones you inherited, were taught, or assumed you should have. Values are like internal guideposts. They help us navigate our path and, more importantly, help us find a way back when we've veered off the course. Remember when I talked about misalignment burnout as walking the path that isn't truly yours? Think of your values as the beacons that light the way back home. Your values are deeply personal. For some people, it's honesty, loyalty, or security. For others, it's freedom, creativity, or authenticity. For me, it's always been family, integrity, inspiration, and a little bit of magic. When you know your values, decisions become clear. priorities become simpler, alignment becomes possible. And when your paths cross with others, when your journey overlaps, merges, or runs parallel, knowing your values helps you stay grounded in your truth, even as you walk beside someone else. So, as we're getting down to it, I just wanted to part with this. Real change isn't instant, but it is possible. To recover from misalignment, burnout, and shift the patterns that are draining you, here is the short version. Name the behavior, the maladaptive or unwanted behavior. Articulate the alternate desired behavior. Realign and discover your core values. And optional, but really can be powerful, uncover and shift the limiting beliefs underneath. With the support of a trained coach or counselor or group, there are many pieces that can be available for you. But above all, remember this: there is hope. The process might be messy, and it does take effort. But if you're ready, real change is possible. So remember, dare to mess it up, dare to fail forward. Until next time, ciao!